Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this latest webinar hosted by the MRC's HTMR Trial Conduct Working Group. I'm Chris Bray from the Clinical Trial Service Unit at the University of Oxford, and it's my pleasure to announce Ashma Krishan, our speaker today. Ashma Krishan is a research associate at the University of Liverpool, and she will be updating us on a project funded by the MRC network of hubs for trials methodology research to develop guidance for statistical analysis plans for clinical trials. Ashma has been working on this project since May 2014. Prior to this, she worked as a statistician at the Edinburgh CTU. Ashma's main area of research interest is survival analysis, and she's recently started a PhD on the analysis and reporting of time-to-event data in randomized controlled trials, impact on evidence synthesis and cost effectiveness. Ashma's presentation will last around 20 minutes, following which there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions or make comments. In case you're not familiar with how to do this in WebEx, we'll be showing you a slide later to provide some guidance. So now, without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Ashma.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm going to start the presentation by providing a rationale for doing this project on the development of guidance for statistical analysis plans for clinical trials. I will then give an overview of what work this project has entailed in order to produce the guidance document. So this is just a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. So moving on to what the purpose of this project is. The contribution of the statistician in the design and analysis of a clinical trial is acknowledged as being essential according to ICH-GCP. There is therefore a need to ensure that the statistical conduct of a trial is well documented and transparent. Guidance on statistical principles for clinical trials state that the principal features of the eventual statistical analysis of the data should be described in the statistical section of the clinical trial protocol. However, both ICH-E9 and SPIRIT guidelines refer to a separate SAP. It is generally accepted that a separate SAP will be required, given that the level of detail appropriate for a SAP is excessive for the protocol. According to the ICH-E9 guidelines, a SAP is a document that contains a more technical and detailed elaboration of the principal features stated in the protocol and includes detailed procedures for executing the statistical analysis of the primary and secondary variables and other data. While guidance exists on the content of clinical trial protocols and reporting standards for clinical trials, both of which require details on statistical analyses, there is a gap in relation to guidance on the content of SAPs. Specific guidance for SAPs needs to be developed. Individual trials and CTUs are often following in-house developed SAP guidance documents and templates. Furthermore, journals publishing SAPs have indicated that they would welcome and benefit from guidance on appropriate format and content. The topic of SAPs was discussed initially at the November 2012 UK CRC Registered CTU Statistics meeting. This is a network of all registered CTUs in the UK, where support to establish SAP guidance using methods applied in the development of existing accepted frameworks was evident. Development of SAP guidance was also independently identified by an international stakeholders group for selected reporting due to the important role of SAPs in reducing such biases as selected reporting of outcomes and analyses. It is important that a systematic and transparent approach is utilised when developing a comprehensive SAP to complement the trial protocol. Detailed guidance on SAP contents will contribute to ensuring the integrity of trial conduct and reporting. This project was initiated in response to the UK CRC CTU statistics meeting with the aim to produce comprehensive guidance for SAPs. The UK CRC Registered CTUs Network SAPs operational group was engaged throughout the project, increasing efficiency and quality. So that was the rationale behind doing the project. In order to produce a guidance document, we started the project by trying to identify what guidance or recommendations are available to use when writing SAPs. So we contacted all major RCT funding bodies, regulators and charitable organisations and asked, what guidance or recommendations do you refer to when writing a SAP? We contacted 39 organisations and received a response from 28. The results indicated that the only relevant guidance that was used was ICHE9, and there was no additional guidance identified and no in-house developed guidance in use either. In order to understand current practice and how many SAPs have been published in peer-reviewed journals to date, we carried out a PubMed search. The bar chart shows all the publications, with the earliest being in 2009. Between 2009 and 2012, there were a few publications each year, with a maximum of 15 each in 2013 and 2014, and with the hope that the numbers will be even higher for 2015. Majority of these publications come from the Trials Journal and Critical Care and Resuscitation. Now that we knew what guidance or recommendations were used and how often SAPs are made publicly available, it was important to understand current practices and opinions about SAPs within CTUs. The SAP survey enabled us to understand best practice along with what guidance and support is required. The survey was sent to all UK CRC registered CTUs. The survey was developed by myself and the lead co-applicant, Carol Gamble, and was developed by published SAPs and ICHE9. We know that surveys are burdensome, and especially when receiving a lot of requests to complete surveys, so we designed the survey with this in mind, hence why we requested CTUs to send us copies of their SAP SOPs and templates in order to reduce the number of questions. The survey was also piloted amongst co-applicants to ensure it was as clear and concise as possible. This all led to a response rate of 100%, which was incredible. The SAP survey results demonstrated variability in processes within CTUs. The results highlighted that 100% of CTUs write a SAP for later phase RCTs, and that 93% of CTUs have a SOP for SAP that they use to write a SAP, while 87% prefer to use a SAP template or set of instructions. Some of the questions in the SAP survey related to opinions of CTUs on SAPs, and in particular about the guidance document. So 83% of CTUs felt guidance on SOPs for SAPs would be helpful. 78% felt a listing should be included in a SOP for SAP, and 85% of CTUs felt guidance on the content of SAPs would be useful. From the comments, it was clear that most CTUs wanted general guidance that they could use if they wish, and compare against their own and refer to, but nothing that would be imposed on them. There was suggestion of having a best practice document and suggestions of concept or spirit type guidance with explanations. So after the SAP survey was complete, a Delphi survey was developed in order to establish consensus on the content of SAPs. The Delphi participants included statisticians and CTUs, contributors to concert and spirit guidelines, methodologists, contributors to pharmaceutical industry, journal editors and regulators. But we did find there was a lot of overlap in terms of the Delphi participants. The list of components was identified using copies of SOPs for SAPs, and SAPs returned in response to the SAP survey. The list was then sent to co-applicants to review, and we were then left with a comprehensive list of components to consider for inclusion within SAPs that the participants could score. The participants were given an opportunity to suggest additional components that we may not have included in our original list during round one. So the definition of consensus that we used was the following. The Delphi survey used a 1 to 9 scale, where a score of 1 to 3 was classed as not important, 4 to 6 was classed as important but not critical, and 7 to 9 was classed as critically important. So for a component to be classed as consensus in, which would be consensus that the component should be included in the SAP guidance document, the definition was 70% or more participants scoring as 7 to 9 and less than 15% participants scoring as 1 to 3. For consensus out, the definition was opposite, so where 70% or more participants scoring as 1 to 3 and less than 15% participants scoring as 7 to 9. For no consensus, the definition was no overall majority in any direction. I will mention borderline consensus in and borderline consensus out in a short while. So the definitions for them was borderline consensus in being where 60 to 69% scored 7 to 9 and less than 15% scored as 1 to 3, and for borderline consensus out, the opposite. So for round 1 of the Delphi survey, we achieved a response rate of 77%, where 71% of them were CTU responders and 29% were non-CTU responders. The results demonstrated at the end of round 1 we had consensus in on 32% of the components, borderline consensus on 11%, and no consensus on 57% of the components. At the end of round 1, 21 additional components which were suggested were included after removing duplicates. For round 2 of the Delphi survey, we achieved a response rate of 96%, which was brilliant. This included 74% of them being CTUs and 26% being non-CTUs. The results for round 2 were as follows: consensus on 42%, consensus on 1%, no consensus on 47%. I will explain the next slide what I meant by borderline consensus and borderline consensus out. So after the Delphi survey was complete, it was necessary to conduct a consensus meeting to discuss the results with the expert panel and also discuss the format of the guidance document. So at the face-to-face meeting, we had expert representation from each demographic, so co-applicants who work at CTUs, representation from MHRA, pharmaceutical industry, and journal editors. The meeting focused on components that achieved borderline consensus in, borderline consensus out, and no consensus. We felt it was important to discuss borderline consensus in and out, as the figures were so close to being in or out. We felt it was important to make a decision on them following discussion. So we asked the expert panel to discuss these components. So to do this, we provided the expert panel with copies of results from round 2 and asked them to discuss the results and then make a recommendation. At the end of the consensus meeting, we had consensus in on 61 items, consensus out on 29 items, and 17 items that the panel felt were related to a SAP and important to document, but could be documented elsewhere. So that included items such as summary of data cleaning or details on location of the data to be analysed, etc. At a consensus meeting, it was also felt that a concert or spirit type guidance with explanations and examples would be the best approach forward. So the guidance document has been written in the context of the following assumptions as agreed by the expert panel: that the protocol is compliant with the Spirit 2013 statement, that the SAP is not a standalone document and should be read in conjunction with the protocol, so avoid replicating large chunks of the protocol but instead reference it, and that the SAP applies to a clean data set, so to be used in a final analysis. So the guidance document is intended for later phase RCTs, so it could be extended to any clinical trial analysis. It provides the minimum content to be included within a SAP, and that the appendix section includes items that are important to SAPs and in particular an RCT, but do not necessarily need to be included in a SAP. And this stems from the Spirit guidelines, which mention that in relation to data management, for example, that they should be referenced to where these items are found, if not in the protocol, and we feel that applies to the SAP too. So if it's not in the protocol or the SAP, then where is it? So after the first draft of the guidance document was complete, we decided to critically review the guidance document at the UK CRC CTU statistics meeting in April this year. The document was sent to all CTU representatives who were attending ahead of the meeting. The document was critically reviewed at the meeting, and everyone attending was given a few weeks to submit any other comments they had. Once all comments were received and all changes were made, the document was piloted by 2 statisticians at Liverpool. The guidance document is currently being reviewed by the expert panel, and once reviewed and changes made, it will be piloted by at least another 4 CTUs. So what next? Once the guidance document is made publicly available, we will encourage users to provide feedback and review. We will link it with other initiatives, so we'll contact HRA to endorse that guidance within their HRA protocol template. We will contact funders and ask them to add a link or reference to the guidance in their Help Authors section. For funders who publish protocols, we will seek to ask them to also publish SAPs so that we increase public availability and transparency and encourage earlier development of SAPs. Journals who accept standalone or supplementary publication of SAPs will be asked to add a link to guidance in their Helpful Author section and also reference it during the peer review process. So that's all from me.
Okay, well, thanks very much indeed, Ashma. We now move on to, we have plenty of time for Qs and As. We have a good number of people who've connected to this webinar. It's about 50 of you currently. So it would be great if you have any comments to raise. If you do have a functional microphone or telephone connection and you wish to speak directly to Ashma, then you can follow the instructions to raise a hand on the slide on the screen at the moment. Alternatively, if you don't, or you're not sure, or you're just feeling a bit shy, you can type in your question in the Q&A panel and I'll be able to read it out on your behalf. So maybe while you're just having a little think about that, Ashma, I just had a question. In terms of the stakeholders that you involved in this, I could see that you also involved representatives from the pharmaceutical industry at certain stages in the project. I was really just wondering if there were any differences apparent in sort of their practice and opinions compared to that of the registered CTUs, who seem to be reasonably consistent in the feedback they gave you from your initial survey.
I think their SAPs are definitely a lot more detailed, and that definitely became apparent during the consensus meeting. But at the same time, they did agree with quite a lot of the things that we did actually have included, and their feedback has actually been really helpful as well. So we'll definitely never be able to have a SAP that is as detailed as them, but I think it's definitely been very helpful to have them on board as well.
And of the SAPs that have been published to date, you sort of indicated early on it's a fairly new phenomenon. Do those tend to be non-industry, sort of government-funded trials?
Yeah, so I think majority of them have been like CTU trials that are being carried out in CTUs.
But did you sense that industry would be also, happy to share maybe their SAPs too, more in the future?
I'm not sure. I think we kind of got the feeling that they would probably prefer to keep them under wraps as opposed to kind of making them publicly available. That's just kind of impression that we got from one or two of the members of the pharmaceutical industry that we have spoken to.
Okay, I mean, I can throw another question to you in a minute maybe, but you've got currently still nearly 50 people on this call. Are there any particular questions that you might like to put to them to encourage them to come back to you?
I think it's just more like what they would feel about the guidance document, whether they think this is something that they would want to use, and we've still got a bit of time before we are going to have the final version. So I think we would actually want people to come forward and say what they would want so that we can actually try and incorporate as many comments and everything on board.
Okay, thanks. Well, we'll see if anybody sort of comes back to you immediately, but obviously you've already shown your email. Maybe we can just flick back to that briefly just so people can make a note of your actually, if you can move back up one in your presentation, just so that people could jot down your email to follow that up afterwards, if they would like to. Great. So the what next slide that you showed earlier, you were sort of mapping things out. I was wondering if you had a timeline that you could give people some indication as to when you're hoping to actually have the guidance publicly available.
I'd maybe say August, September, but again, I might have it completely wrong. It's just going to depend on how long it takes with the expert panel, and then depending on what their comments are. But we are hoping kind of like late summer, but I don't want anyone to quote me on that.
Okay, thanks. Well, we have had a question submitted, typed in, from Mark Kelson at Cardiff University, the South East Wales Trials Unit. So I'll just read that out to you, Ashma. So he says, thanks for the excellent presentation. Were you surprised about the recommendation that the SAP should not be standalone? Are you still looking for CTUs to trial the SAP guidance?
Yes, we will be looking for CTUs to trial it. So it depends whether you actually want to come on board and pilot the guidance, which we would be more than you were more than welcome to. And if you don't want to do that, then I think as soon as it's made publicly available, we will be happy for people to pilot it and test it and provide us feedback. So maybe if in about a year's time there are quite a lot of changes that people would actually want to be made to it, then we will be happy to review it at that stage.
Okay, we're just checking, so we'll leave it just another 30 seconds or so, just in case anyone's feeling shy and they have a question that they really would like to ask before we wrap this up.
Okay.
I mean, it strikes me that you've been very thorough in the process and you've still got the next stages ahead. And obviously, you're aiming to have a guidance document that will be well received. I mean, that's your hope. Do you think you're going to achieve that?
Hopefully, like we've had, I think we've had like such positive feedback, and I think a lot of this, like just at the UK CRC statistics meeting as well, when we had a critical review, we had a lot of people that felt really positive about the guidance document. So we're going to hope that it is something that people will use, and it's something that's actually going to be helpful for them as well. So that's how we would be happy to review it in about a year's time, and if there is something that people feel strongly about that should be included in or should be taken out, then we'll be happy to like have it review it again and see, because we just want something that people will actually use, as opposed to just another guidance document that's just going to be available.
Okay, and in terms of the stakeholders, I mean, one that you've mentioned was industry, but have you also involved people from other countries in the process to date?
Well, one of the pharmaceutical companies has been Johnson & Johnson that have been on board. So I guess, yeah, in that sense, we have had international, and we've also had a few people in the pharmaceutical industry in the UK as well on board, who have kind of been quite positive and said that this is something that will be helpful. Maybe not personally to them, but they have kind of like felt as if it is going to be something that will be useful to have.
Okay, that's great. I mean, I'm sorry you're hearing lots of my voice. I'm mainly talking just in the hope that we can get somebody else to ask a question, but I've got one more that I will ask, and if you don't have any extras raised by then we will draw this to a close. You gave us some clues as to how you got such a phenomenal response to your survey to the 46 registered CTUs in the UK. Could you maybe just go over that one more time? Because I mean, as you say, they are extensively surveyed, and to get 100% response rate, I'm not sure I've seen that before. I guess it's partly that you picked a topic they're interested in, but I think you said there was some practical, there's a practical dimension to that in achieving such a good result. You'd obviously put a lot of thought into it. Could you maybe just recap on that very briefly?
Yeah, of course. So we did actually ask them to send in their SAPSOPs and also examples of SAPs as well, to ensure that we could have a very clear, in order to kind of like shorten and reduce the number of questions. And the survey was also piloted by the co-applicants as well. So we did try to make it as clear and concise as possible. But it was definitely not an easy task to get the 100%, and we did, from where we initially kind of only had it open for a month, I think we did end up taking about 3 months to get all the responses in. So it was definitely a lot of work did actually go into it, and we did. But I think the CTUs have been really good in the sense that we did actually have about 80–85% by within about 2 months anyway, and a lot of it was just people going away on summer holidays. So they were, and I think everyone did actually want to complete it. I think it's always just a timing issue, and especially when they're receiving so many requests to complete other surveys as well. So yeah, so they've been great, and I think me and Carol did try and keep calling and harassing people as well. So we did eventually manage to get the full 100%. It
Great,
definitely
thanks.
wasn't easy.
Okay, thanks, Ashma. We've just had one further question typed in. I think I know the answer. This is from Caroline Haig, who's at the University of Glasgow. She says, how would a CTU go about volunteering to pilot? And I'm guessing that if you move down to your next slide and it's got your email address, that's probably the answer.
Yes. So Caroline, if you want to pilot it, then just contact me, and I'll let you know about timelines and things.
Okay, thanks. So, and if anyone has any questions after this, then of course they should feel free to email you, Ashma. There's a couple of points I'd just like to make before we wrap up. One is that we are recording this webinar, including the Q&A session. This will be made available on the MRC HTMR network website, but we've been informed this won't be possible until a major new update to the website goes live in a couple of months' time. In the light of this, we're looking into an alternative way of making the recording available sooner than that. And if we are successful, we'll email everyone who's on today's webinar to let them know. The other thing is that we have another webinar also from the Northwest Hub in Liverpool in just 3 weeks' time on Tuesday the 7th of July at the usual time of 12:30. Beth Conroy and Nick Harmon will be presenting on trial steering committees for randomized controlled trials, a review of current practice. Their webinar will be promoted through the usual channels later this week. So it just remains for me to say thank you all for joining this webinar today, and especially to Ashma Krishan, our speaker, for a very clear and informative presentation, and for fielding all my questions and one or two from you. So we hope you'll join us again next time. Thanks and goodbye.